The rain drummed against the windows of my downtown Chicago penthouse as I stared at the elegant invitation in my hands. Gold embossed lettering on cream cardstock announced the annual Children's Hope Foundation Gala, hosted by Mrs. Jennifer Hamilton Cross, my sister-in-law. I set the invitation on my marble countertop next to my morning coffee, the steam rising like my conflicted emotions. 3 years. 3 years since Marcus and I had gotten married, and Jenna still treated me like I was some street kid who'd accidentally wandered into her pristine world. "You going to that thing?" Marcus asked, emerging from our bedroom in his navy suit, adjusting his tie. My husband of 3 years looked every inch the successful investment banker he was, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. He knew what these family gatherings did to me. "Your sister specifically requested my presence," I said, mimicking Jenna's crisp North Shore accent. "How could I possibly refuse?" Marcus walked over and kissed my temple. "Baby, you don't have to prove anything to her." But he was wrong. I had everything to prove. Growing up in Englewood, I'd learned early that respect wasn't given. It was earned. My mother, Dolores Washington, had worked 3 jobs to keep food on our table after my father left. She cleaned offices downtown during the week, served at a soul food restaurant on weekends, and somehow still found time to help me with homework at our tiny kitchen table. "Education is your way out, baby girl," she'd tell me, her worn hands tracing over my math problems. "But don't you ever forget where you came from." I never did. Even as I earned my MBA from Northwestern, even as I built my event planning company from nothing into a $1 million business, even as I married into one of Chicago's oldest families, I never forgot. But Jenna saw my success as some kind of lucky accident. She'd grown up in Winnetka, attended private schools, had her trust fund set up before she could walk. To her, I was still just the girl from the South Side who'd somehow tricked her brother into marriage. "The venue's beautiful," Marcus said, reading over my shoulder. "The Grandview Ballroom, right? That place is impossible to book." I smiled into my coffee cup. "Yeah, impossible." My phone buzzed with a text from my business partner and best friend Keisha. "Girl, you ready for tonight?" I got the champagne chilling and the popcorn ready. This bout to be good. Keisha had been with me since the beginning. We'd met at community college, both of us working full-time while taking night classes. She was the only person who knew the full truth about tonight's event, and she was more excited than I was. The afternoon flew by in a blur of final preparations. I stood in my walk-in closet, running my fingers over the options. The black Vera Wang? Too obvious. The emerald Oscar de la Renta? Too flashy. Finally, I settled on a midnight blue silk dress by a local black designer. Elegant, understated, but with enough presence to command attention. As I applied my makeup, I thought about my mother's words from that morning when I'd called her. "Baby, you remember what I taught you about fighting? Don't throw the first punch," I'd recited. "That's right. But when somebody comes for you," her voice had gotten steely, "you make sure they remember why they shouldn't have." At 7:30, Marcus and I pulled up to the Grandview Ballroom in his Tesla. The building rose 15 stories into the Chicago skyline, its Art Deco facade illuminated against the darkening November sky. Valets in crisp uniforms rushed to open our doors, and I stepped out onto the red carpet, my heels clicking against the pavement. "Mrs. Cross!" a photographer called out, his camera flashing. "Can we get a picture?" I smiled and posed with Marcus, my hand resting on his chest. 3 years of marriage, and I still felt that flutter when he looked at me, like I was the most beautiful woman in the room. "You ready for this?" he whispered in my ear as we walked toward the entrance. I squeezed his hand. "Baby, I was born ready." But as we approached the gleaming doors of the ballroom, my heart began to race. Tonight wasn't just about family dinner or casual gathering. Tonight, Jenna had the stage, the spotlight, and 200 of Chicago's social elite as her audience. Tonight, she thought she held all the cards. She had no idea the game had already been rigged. Chapter 2. Silk Gloves and Sharp Tongues. The Grandview Ballroom was transformed into a winter wonderland. Crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows across ivory linens, and towering floral arrangements of white roses and baby's breath created an ethereal atmosphere. A string quartet played softly in the corner, while guests in evening wear mingled with champagne flutes and practiced smiles. Jenna had outdone herself. I had to give her credit. "Wow," Marcus breathed beside me. "She really pulled out all the stops." I nodded, surveying the room with a professional eye. The lighting was perfect, warm enough to be flattering, bright enough for photos. The acoustics were flawless, every conversation and laugh carrying at just the right volume. Even the temperature was ideal, cool enough that the silk and taffeta gowns wouldn't wilt, warm enough that bare shoulders stayed comfortable. It was exactly the kind of event I would have designed. Marcus, there you are. Jenna's voice cut through the ambient noise like a champagne flute hitting marble. She glided toward us in a cream-colored gown that probably cost more than most people's cars, her blonde hair swept up in an elaborate chignon. Behind her trailed her husband, Richard, a man so bland he seemed to fade into the wallpaper. Jenna, this is incredible, Marcus said, accepting his sister's air kisses. You've really outdone yourself. Oh, you know me. I do love a good cause. Her eyes slid to me, taking in my dress with the precision of a military scanner. Nia, how nice to see you. I wasn't sure you'd make it. The pause before nice was calculated, just long enough to plant doubt without being overtly rude. Wouldn't miss it for the world, I replied smoothly. The venue is stunning. You have excellent taste. Something flickered behind her eyes. Surprise? Suspicion? But then her social mask slipped back into place. Well, when you know the right people, you can make anything happen. Come, let me introduce you to some of the other guests. I think you'll find them educational. She looped her arm through Marcus's, effectively separating us as we moved deeper into the crowd. I followed a step behind, feeling like a child being dragged to the principal's office. This is Dr. Patricia Whitmore, Jenna was saying to a silver-haired woman dripping in diamonds. She runs the pediatric wing at Northwestern Memorial, and her husband, Judge Robert Whitmore. The couple smiled politely at Marcus, their gazes warm and interested. When they turned to me, the temperature dropped about 10 degrees. And this is Nia, Jenna continued, her voice taking on that particular tone white women use when they're about to say something they think is generous. She's Marcus's wife. She has a little event planning business. Little. The word hit me like a slap. My company, Washington Events, had just been featured in Chicago Magazine as one of the city's fastest-growing minority-owned businesses. We'd planned weddings for athletes, corporate events for Fortune 500 companies, and fundraisers that had raised millions for various charities. But to Jenna, it was little. How interesting, Dr. Whitmore said, her smile never wavering, even as her eyes dismissed me entirely. What kinds of events do you plan, dear? The dear was the cherry on top of the condescension sundae. Oh, you know, I said, matching their energy perfectly. Birthdays, anniversaries, the occasional corporate merger celebration. Nothing too fancy. I felt Marcus tense beside me, but I kept my expression pleasant. This wasn't the time or place to pull out my resume. As we moved through the crowd, the pattern repeated itself. Jenna would introduce Marcus with his full credentials. Northwestern graduate, investment banker at Goldman Sachs, member of the Union League Club. I was simply Nia, Marcus's wife, with my little business. By the third introduction, I was ready to snap. By the fifth, I was calculating how much champagne it would take to drown my sister-in-law in the decorative fountain. But I maintained my composure, smiled graciously, and let Jenna dig her own grave one shovel of condescension at a time. Dinner is served, announced a woman in a crisp black suit. She caught my eye across the room and gave me the slightest nod. I nodded back. We found our assigned seats at table 3, not the head table where Jenna held court, but close enough to hear every word of her performance. I was seated between Marcus and a bore of a man who spent the entire salad course explaining the intricacies of municipal bond trading. Ladies and gentlemen, Jenna's voice rang out over the gentle clink of silverware as she stood at the podium. I want to thank you all for being here tonight to support the Children's Hope Foundation. Applause rippled through the room. I clapped politely, studying my sister-in-law as she basked in the attention. She looked absolutely radiant up there, every inch the gracious hostess and philanthropist. This venue, she continued, gesturing grandly at the soaring ceiling and elegant appointments, represents everything we strive for: excellence, beauty, and exclusivity. These are the spaces where real change happens, where the right people come together to make a difference. The right people. I sipped my champagne and let that phrase wash over me. Of course, Jenna went on, not everyone understands what it takes to move in these circles. There's a certain refinement required, a level of sophistication that, frankly, not everyone possesses. My grip tightened on my champagne flute. Around me, heads nodded in agreement. I caught Marcus's eye, and he looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. But that's what makes nights like this so special, Jenna concluded. When we come together as a community of like-minded individuals who share the same values, the same commitment to excellence, well, that's when magic happens. More applause. I set down my champagne flute very carefully. She's really something, isn't she? Whispered the woman to my left, Mrs. Eleanor Brisbane, wife of a prominent real estate developer. So articulate, so refined. You're lucky to have married into such a distinguished family. Very lucky, I agreed. As the evening progressed, the commentary got bolder. During the silent auction, I overheard Jenna telling a group of women about how she'd taken Marcus's wife under her wing. It's really quite charitable work, she was saying. I mean, she's sweet, but she comes from such a different background. I've been trying to help her understand how things work in our world, as if I hadn't been navigating these same circles for years, as if I hadn't earned my place through hard work and determination. But the final straw came during dessert. I was returning from the ladies' room when I heard my name. Jenna was holding court at a nearby table, her voice just loud enough to carry. I mean, she's sweet, Jenna was saying, but a little too ghetto for events like this. The words hit me like ice water. Around Jenna's table, a few women exchanged glances. Some looked uncomfortable, others seemed to be enjoying the drama. I felt every eye in the vicinity turn toward me, waiting to see if I'd heard, waiting to see what I'd do. The smart move would be to pretend I hadn't heard anything, to slip back to my table and maintain my dignity. But as I stood there in my designer dress in the ballroom I'd walked through 1,000 times, listening to this woman dismiss me with such casual cruelty, something inside me shifted. My mother's voice echoed in my head. When somebody comes for you, you make sure they remember why they shouldn't have. I walked back to my table, sat down gracefully, and picked up my champagne flute. Marcus leaned over, concern etched on his face. You okay, baby? I smiled at him, the kind of smile that had gotten me through boardroom negotiations and hostile client meetings. Never better, I said, because Jenna was about to learn that sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one who stays quiet the longest. Chapter 3. The house always wins. The dessert course was in full swing when I saw him approaching. David Chen, the event manager, was making his way through the tables with the practiced ease of someone who'd orchestrated hundreds of high-end events. His black suit was impeccable, his expression professionally neutral, but I caught the slight quirk of his lips as he neared my table. This was it. Excuse me for the interruption, David said, stopping beside my chair. The conversations around us gradually died down as curious gazes turned our way. I looked up at him with polite interest, as if I had no idea why he might be approaching me specifically. Ma'am, David continued, his voice carrying just far enough to be heard by nearby tables, I just wanted to confirm that you're satisfied with how everything is proceeding this evening. The caterers are ready for the dessert course expansion, and the wine service for the VIP reception afterward. Would you like us to proceed as planned? Perfect silence fell over our section of the ballroom. You could have heard a champagne bubble pop. From the corner of my eye, I saw Jenna's head snap up from her table. Her fork, laden with chocolate torte, froze halfway to her mouth. Wait, she said, her voice cutting through the quiet. Why are you asking her? David turned toward Jenna with polite confusion. I'm sorry? Why are you asking her about the event schedule? Jenna stood up, her cream-colored gown rustling. I'm hosting this gala. If there are questions about the catering or the schedule, you should be speaking to me. I could feel the energy in the room shift. 200 guests were suddenly aware that something interesting was happening, and in a crowd like this, interesting meant scandalous. David looked genuinely puzzled now. I apologize for any confusion, Mrs. Hamilton Cross, but my instructions were clear. All event decisions go through. David, I said softly, setting down my champagne flute and standing up. It's fine. I think there's been a misunderstanding. Jenna's eyes narrowed as she looked between David and me. What kind of misunderstanding? I smoothed my dress and walked slowly toward the center of the space between our tables. In my peripheral vision,